The Jungle That Breathes. Chapter 1. Into the Green Hell. The first thing Robert Mason noticed when the Huey's skids touched the damp soil of the Truong Sun was not the enemy nor the gunfire that they had been warned about, but the air itself. It was alive. The jungle swallowed him and the 20 men of Bravo Company the moment they stepped out of the chopper. The canopy overhead was so thick that it smothered the sun. What light did manage to filter through came in fractured beams, sharp and unnatural, like blades of gold cutting across a sea of endless green. The air was wet, heavy, and hot. Every breath tasted of mud-rotting leaves and the slow decay of centuries. Someone muttered behind him, "Jesus, it's like walking into the mouth of something." No one laughed. The Truong Sun Mountains had been a whispered terror among American units since the war began. They called it the Green Hell, the artery through which the enemy bled southward, carrying rifles, rice, and reinforcements, along what they named the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Command spoke of the trail as a series of paths, bridges, and hidden depots, but standing there, Mason understood the truth. It was not a trail. It was an organism. The jungle breathed. Every time the wind moved through the canopy, the leaves didn't simply rustle, they inhaled, then exhaled. The branches creaked like ribs expanding. The vines that curled around tree trunks tightened and loosened in silent rhythm, like veins pulsing with sap instead of blood. Mason checked his radio. Static hissed through the receiver, drowning out Bravo's chatter. Even when he tuned to command frequency, all he heard was a faint crackle, like whispers too far away to make sense of. "Can't raise Eagle Base," he said into the handset. "Sir, maybe we're too deep already," one of the privates replied, glancing nervously at the endless green around them. They were less than an hour's walk from the landing zone, but already the jungle had taken command. By dusk, sweat had soaked through their uniforms, salt burning into their eyes, boots sinking into the spongy earth with every step. The air was so dense that voices didn't carry far. When Mason tried calling to Lieutenant Parker, the words seemed to fall flat, muffled by the trees. And then came the first sign, a sound low and steady. At first, Mason thought it was his own breathing echoing in the helmet. But as he stopped to listen, he realized it was bigger, vast, inhuman, a rhythm deep in the ground vibrating through the roots beneath their feet. Thump. Pause. Thump like a heartbeat. Like the earth itself was alive. Private Jensen froze, staring into the shadows. "Did you hear that?" "Keep moving," Parker barked, though his own voice was tight. "It's the wind." But the wind had no pulse. Night in the jungle fell fast and without warning. One moment there was the dying glow of a fractured sunbeam, and the next there was nothing but blackness so thick it pressed against their eyelids. They set up a perimeter lighting, no fire-chewing rations, in silence. The sounds of the jungle multiplied. Cicadas screamed, frogs croaked. Distant howls echoed from creatures they could not name. Yet beneath it all, Mason still felt it, the rhythm, the breathing, and then the whisper. It came through his radio first, a hiss of static and then words. Not English, not entirely Vietnamese either. Something in between, broken, distorted, stretched thin, as if spoken underwater. "Leave. Now." Mason jerked upright, headset pressed against his ear. "Say again, identify." Only static replied. The others stirred, uneasy. "Sir," one private asked, "you hear that too?" Before Mason could answer, a scream tore through the night. Private Hernandez, who had been on the far edge of the perimeter, was gone. By the time they reached his post, the ground was disturbed. Mud-churned rifle, abandoned, but no trace of Hernandez remained. No blood, no footprints leading away. Just the jungle, dense and unbroken, as if it had swallowed him whole. The forest around them exhaled, and Bravo Company hardened men who had faced fire and death shivered like children in the dark. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Canopy. The disappearance of Private Hernandez changed everything. Bravo Company had lost men before. Ambushes, sniper fire, sudden mortar strikes from the unseen. But this was different. There had been no enemy gunfire, no struggle, not even a cry for help beyond that first scream. Hernandez had been swallowed whole by the jungle, and the forest offered no clue of his fate. For Lieutenant Parker, the only way forward was discipline. He ordered the men back into formation, rifles ready, eyes scanning every shadow. Stay sharp. The enemy's out here, and they know this terrain better than we do. But the words rang hollow in Mason's ears. The jungle wasn't simply terrain. It was alive, and its breath was all around them. They marched deeper the following morning, though few had truly slept. Each soldier carried fatigue like a second pack, eyes bloodshot, nerves frayed. The trail was faint, little more than a depression in the undergrowth, but it drew them on like a vein leading to the heart of something vast. The radio was worse than useless. Mason heard bursts of static, and within it, voices. Not the garbled chatter of command, but whispers urgent, close, as though men were speaking directly into his skull. He couldn't make out the words, but sometimes he swore they spoke his name. Robert. He ripped off the headset, chest heaving. But when he looked at the others, he saw the same haunted expression. They heard it too. Private Jensen muttered, "It's the ghosts, man. Viet spirits. They're telling us to leave." Corporal Sanders sneered, though his voice shook. "Ghosts don't exist. VC do. They want us scared." Mason wasn't so sure. That afternoon, they reached a clearing where the canopy split just enough to let sunlight pour down in shafts of gold. For a moment, the men relaxed. It was the first time in days they'd seen the sky. Then they noticed the trees. Each trunk was carved. Symbols gouged deep into the bark, blackened as if by fire. Circles, lines, faces without eyes. Some marks bled sap that glistened like fresh blood. The clearing reeked of incense, long burned away, though no trace of fire remained. Parker spat into the dirt. Enemy markings. Trail signs. But Mason shook his head. These aren't maps. They're warnings. The forest seemed to lean in at his words as though listening. That night, the whispers returned. Louder. Clearer. Mason awoke to the sound of dozens of voices murmuring in unison, coming not from his radio, but from the trees themselves. He sat up, rifle ready, scanning the dark. The forest glowed faintly, leaves trembling, as if stirred by a great inhalation. And then through the shadows, he saw them. Figures moved between the trees. Shapes of men, their uniforms ragged, their bodies streaked with mud. Some wore the pith helmets of the Viet Minh, others the simple khaki of the North Vietnamese army. But their faces were pale and hollow eyes, empty sockets glowing with faint green fire. They did not walk. They drifted weightless like smoke given form. Mason's breath caught. Ghosts. The others saw them too. Sanders opened fire, his M16 spitting flame. Bullets tore into the trees, but the figures did not fall. They rippled like water, vanishing and reappearing untouched. The jungle itself seemed to recoil at the gunfire, branches thrashing, vines snapping down from above like whips. "Cease fire!" Parker shouted, but it was too late. The forest was awake. The attack came swift and merciless. Not from the phantoms, they remained untouchable, a tide of silent witnesses, but from the jungle itself. Roots surged from the ground, tripping men. Vines lashed out, wrapping around rifles, throats, limbs. The canopy howled as if in fury, wind tearing through branches with a voice like 1,000 screams. Private O'Donnell was the first to fall, dragged into the undergrowth by something unseen. His shriek cut off abruptly, leaving only the wet sound of tearing. Blood spattered across the leaves, steaming in the humid air. Bravo Company fired wildly, muzzle flashes strobing the night. But every bullet vanished into the green. The jungle absorbed it all, unyielding, eternal. Through it all, Mason saw the phantoms watching, silent, stern. Their hollow eyes locked on the Americans, as if judging. By dawn, the survivors were broken. 3 men gone, Hernandez O'Donnell, and now Corporal Sanders, whose body had been found hanging high in the trees, strangled by vines that bore no leaves. No one spoke of ghosts, but every man knew. The jungle had claimed them, and it would not stop. Mason thought of the whispers. Not all had been threats. Some had sounded like warnings. Please. He remembered stories told by South Vietnamese allies of Rung Ma, the ghost forests, places where the spirits of fallen soldiers lingered, protecting their homeland. What if they weren't trying to kill Bravo Company? What if they were trying to drive them out? As the company moved onward, morale shattered. Mason began to notice patterns. The whispers grew strongest near old battlefields, places where the earth was still scarred by shell fire. He found rusted helmets half buried in the mud, shattered rifles entwined in roots, bones bleached white by sun and rain. The phantoms always appeared there, drifting among the relics of war. Guardians of the dead. One evening, Mason approached Lieutenant Parker. "Sir, we're not just fighting men here. We're fighting the land itself. Every soldier that's died here, they've become part of it. We can't win." Parker's jaw tightened. "We're soldiers. We finished the mission. Don't talk that way in front of the men." But Parker's eyes betrayed him. He had seen them too, and he was afraid. The deeper they marched, the less the jungle resembled any natural place. The trees grew thicker, their trunks swollen and fused together as if entire battalions had become wood and leaf. The air itself vibrated with a steady rhythm, inhale, exhale, the breath of something colossal. The men no longer spoke. To break the silence was to invite the jungle's attention. They marched in dread, every step echoing in a cathedral of green. Mason began to wonder if they had already died, if Bravo Company was nothing more than shades stumbling deeper into the afterlife. And in the branches above, the phantoms watched, always watching, whispering, waiting. Chapter 3. Brothers of the Forest. The jungle had taken on a rhythm. Each dawn began not with the sun, it was rarely visible through the choking canopy, but with the steady drone of cicadas rising in unison, like a great machine grinding to life. Each dusk ended not with nightfall, but with silence when even the insects dared not intrude upon the breathing of the forest. Bravo Company moved within this rhythm, out of step intruders in a place that seemed to reject them at every turn. For Robert Mason, the line between dream and waking had dissolved. He saw the phantoms by day now drifting in the edges of his vision, gaunt silhouettes in tattered uniforms, their eyes hollow fires. When he blinked, they were gone. When he stared too long, they lingered. The whispers in the radio had followed him into his sleep, filling his head with words he could not fully understand. Sometimes they came in broken English, other times in a language that flowed like water, Vietnamese. He guessed, though its cadences seemed older, deeper than any human tongue. One night, he dreamed of fire. He stood in a clearing filled with smoke, the trees charred black. Dozens of figures stood around him silent, their skins scorched and peeling, but their backs unbent. One stepped forward, his uniform nothing but ash clinging to his frame, and raised a hand toward Mason. His mouth moved, and though the words were foreign, Mason felt the meaning pierce him like a blade. "This is our home. You cannot take it." Mason awoke with the taste of ash on his tongue. Meanwhile, half a world away from Mason's haunted mind, another story was being written in the very same jungle. It belonged to Nguyen Van Thai, a soldier of the People's Army of Vietnam. His unit had been stationed along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a lifeline carved through impossible terrain, carrying supplies, medicine, and hope from north to south. Every day, Thai and his comrades risked death from airstrikes, artillery, and napalm. But the jungle sheltered them. It was their shield, their mother, their eternal comrade. To Thai, the forest was alive long before the Americans spoke of ghosts. Its roots gave cover for tunnels. Its canopy blinded plains. Its rivers quenched their thirst. And when men fell, friends, brothers, the jungle received them gently. Thai believed their spirits did not leave. They became part of the land, watchful and resolute. When he walked at night, he sometimes felt them marching beside him, silent, unseen, but always there. The Americans called it superstition. To Thai, it was truth. He could feel the presence of the fallen. He could hear their breath in the wind. Bravo Company staggered deeper. Their ranks thinned not only from the jungle's wrath, but from their own unraveling minds. Men flinched at shadows, fired at whispers. Lieutenant Parker forced them onward, clinging to duty, as if it were a rope dangling over an abyss. But the abyss was winning. Mason, torn between reason and terror, began to wonder if there was another way. He remembered the words of the phantom in his dream. "This is our home." Maybe the jungle was not trying to kill them outright. Maybe it was offering them a choice: leave or be destroyed. But Parker would not leave. Orders chained them as tightly as any vine. Elsewhere, Nguyen Van Thai crouched in the undergrowth, watching Bravo Company through the scope of his old SKS rifle. He did not fire. He had been ordered not to waste bullets unless victory was assured. Instead, his mission was to observe, to let the jungle do what it did best: bleed the enemy dry, slowly, relentlessly. He could see the fear in their movements, the exhaustion dragging at their boots. He could hear their ragged breathing echoing unnaturally through the trees, as though the forest itself amplified their weakness. He whispered to his fallen comrades, whose names he carried like talismans: Hung Dong Phúc. "Watch over us. Protect this land." The leaves rustled though no wind stirred. Thai smiled grimly. The forest had answered. That night, Bravo made camp by a stream. The water ran red with silt, but the men drank it greedily, too parched to care. Mason sat apart, notebook in hand, trying to record what he saw, though the words bent beneath the weight of his dread. His pen scratched out fragments. The jungle is awake. It knows us. The dead are its eyes. As he wrote, the air grew heavy, the smell of smoke threading through the damp. He looked up and froze. Across the stream, standing in the trees, were figures, dozens of them. Their bodies blackened, their uniforms aflame, yet unburning, their eyes green coals. They did not move, but they watched, always watched. Private Jensen began to sob. "They're here again. Jesus Christ, they're here again." Lieutenant Parker raised his rifle, but Mason grabbed his arm. Don't shoot." "Why the hell not?" "Because it won't matter. Because they're not our enemy." The words spilled from him before he could stop them, and in his chest, he knew they were true. far from the terrified Americans, Nguyen Van Thai and his comrades listened to the jungle's symphony, the whispers of wind through branches, the distant calls of night birds, the low hum that rose from the earth itself. They moved like shadows, unseen, unheard, carrying rice, medicine, ammunition, along trails that the Americans could never fully map. To the outsiders, the forest was a labyrinth. To the Vietnamese, it was home. Every tree a friend, every shadow a shield. Thai thought often of the men who had died here. Their bodies lay buried shallowly beneath the soil or lost entirely to the green embrace. Yet in his dreams, they marched still, their footsteps steady, their songs carried on the wind. Sometimes he woke with tears on his face, but never with fear. The dead were not gone. They were with him, always with him. And when the Americans blundered deeper into the jungle, lost and bleeding, Thai knew the spirits were at work. The jungle was reminding them, this is not your land. In Bravo's camp, the phantoms began to move. Slowly, silently, they raised their hands as one. A gesture not of attack, but of command. A single message. Leave. But Parker did not understand. He ordered his men to fire. The jungle erupted in chaos gunfire, shredding the silence muzzle flashes, painting the trees in bursts of orange. Yet when the smoke cleared, the phantoms still stood, unharmed, unmoved. And then the forest answered. The wind roared through the canopy like a hurricane tearing branches free. Vines lashed down like whips. Roots surged from the ground, toppling tents, snapping rifles in two. Bravo company screamed, their bullets swallowed by the endless green. Men were dragged into the dark, their cries cut short. Mason fell to his knees, clutching his head. The whispers were deafening now. Layered voices speaking in unison. He could not understand the words, but he felt their weight, judgment, condemnation. Mercy, perhaps, but only if they obeyed. Through the chaos, Mason looked across the stream and saw him. A man, flesh and blood, crouched in the shadows with a rifle. Not a phantom. A soldier. Vietnamese. Their eyes met across the distance, two men bound by war staring through the veil of ghosts. Mason's heart lurched. The phantoms were not alone. The living and the dead were one. And in that moment, Mason understood the truth. Bravo Company was not fighting an army. They were fighting a nation, a people, a forest, a memory that would never die. By dawn, the survivors were few. Bodies lay tangled in roots, their faces pale in death. The jungle had claimed more souls. Lieutenant Parker stood rigid, jaw set, refusing to admit defeat. But Mason knew the mission was lost. They were already walking corpses, waiting to be swallowed whole. In the undergrowth, Nguyen Van Thai whispered a prayer for the fallen, his own and even theirs. The jungle had no borders for the dead. All were equal beneath its breath. He rose, melting back into the trees. The forest closed around him, swallowing his figure like mist. And Bravo Company staggered on deeper into the lungs of a living nightmare. Chapter 4. The Forest's Revenge. Dawn broke without light. The sky was a murky gray behind the trees, the canopy suffocating any promise of sun. Mist hung low, clinging to rifles and boots, coiling between the roots like pale serpents. For Bravo Company, there was no day anymore. Only a blur of exhaustion, terror, and the steady, gnawing certainty that they were no longer soldiers, but prey. Robert Mason walked in silence, his rifle heavy in his hands, though he no longer trusted it. The forest was unmoved by bullets. The phantoms did not fall. The vines did not bleed. He thought of the man he had seen across the stream, the Vietnamese soldier crouched in the undergrowth, real and alive. It should have comforted him that at least part of this nightmare belonged to flesh and blood. But it didn't. If anything, it made it worse. Because it meant the enemy and the forest were one living and dead. Parker's voice barked through the fog. "Keep moving. Stay tight." But the men no longer listened with conviction. Their boots dragged, their eyes darted into the mist, where shapes shifted and vanished. Private Jensen muttered prayers. Corporal Ramirez scratched crosses into the mud with his bayonet. Mason simply walked, waiting for the forest to decide their fate. Elsewhere, Nguyen Van Tai crouched in a hollow of roots, watching through the lattice of vines. His unit had prepared for days. Pits lined with sharpened stakes. Mines buried shallow beneath the mud. Snipers posted like shadows in the trees. The forest was their fortress, their weapon, their ally. Thai's orders were clear: let the jungle weaken them until the moment came to strike. And the moment was near. He could hear Bravo stumbling closer, their labored breath carrying like signals. He looked to his comrade Hua, who nodded. They were ghosts in their own land, invisible until the instant of death. Thai closed his eyes briefly and whispered, "Em những người đã ngã xuống, hãy cùng chúng tôi chiến đấu. Brothers who have fallen, fight with us." The forest answered with silence and then with breath. The leaves rustled though no wind stirred. The jungle was awake. Bravo Company entered a clearing littered with mist. Lieutenant Parker raised a fist, signaling halt. The men froze, their nerves strung taut. Mason felt his heart pound against his ribs. The air itself seemed to tremble. And then the first trap sprung. Private Ellis screamed as the ground collapsed beneath him. He fell into a pit impaled on bamboo stakes sharpened to knives. His blood soaked the earth. The company exploded into chaos. Some tried to rush forward, others back, but the ground betrayed them again, mines flashing fire dirt and bones spraying skyward. Men dropped like rag dolls, torn apart in seconds. Gunfire erupted from the trees. Invisible bullets cut down those who still stood. Bravo returned fire, blindly spraying lead into the jungle, hitting nothing. The forest swallowed the sound, turned it into echoes, made it impossible to know where the enemy was. Shapes darted between trunks, there and gone. Mason thought he saw faces in the mist, burned faces, spectral eyes, but then he realized they were soldiers. Real men. Real ghosts. From his position, Thai fired a single round. A clean shot. A man fell. He shifted, fired again. Another. He and his comrades moved like shadows, never staying in one place, their rifles cracking and vanishing into silence. To the Americans, it was madness. To Thai, it was discipline, patience, the art of war. The forest joined the battle. Vines tangled around boots, roots tripped fleeing men, branches snapped overhead. It was as if the spirits themselves had woven the traps. Thai's comrade Hua threw a grenade, the blast rattling the mist. When the smoke cleared, bodies lay broken, and the survivors huddled together, firing at ghosts. And through it all, the whispers rose. The jungle breathed louder and louder, a chorus of the dead. Mason fell to his knees beside a dying comrade. Ellis impaled, blood bubbling from his mouth. "They're everywhere," Ellis gasped. "They won't let us leave." His eyes widened as if he saw something Mason could not. "They're calling me." And then he was gone. Mason looked up and saw them, phantoms standing behind the Vietnamese soldiers, burnt and broken, marching in silence. They fought together, the living and the dead, one army. The truth struck Mason like a hammer. This was not just a war of nations. It was a war of spirits, and America could never win it. The ambush ended as suddenly as it began. The jungle fell quiet again, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Half of Bravo Company lay dead or dying. Parker raged, screaming orders into the silence, but his voice sounded small, brittle. The men no longer believed. Mason staggered to his feet, staring into the trees. And there, for the second time, he saw him, the Vietnamese soldier. Their eyes locked. No words passed, but Mason understood. Leave. That was the message. Not hatred, not vengeance. A warning. Parker raised his rifle. Mason shoved it down. Stop. We can't kill them. We can't kill any of them. Parker snarled. You've lost your mind. No. Mason said, his voice hollow. We've lost the war. In the shadows. Nguyen Van Tai lowered his rifle. He did not fire again. The jungle had taken enough. The spirits were sated for now. He whispered a final prayer and melted back into the forest, his comrades vanishing with him like smoke. The Americans remained broken, terrified, and fewer with each passing hour. The jungle closed around them, breathing, watching, waiting. And for Robert Mason, the truth was carved into his bones. They were no longer soldiers in Vietnam. They were intruders in a world that belonged to the dead. Chapter 5. The Last Breath of the Jungle. The jungle had become a labyrinth of silence. What remained of Bravo Company stumbled forward through the mist, fewer than 20 men, now their uniforms torn, their faces gaunt with terror. No one spoke. Words felt useless, fragile things in a world that breathed heavier than men. Even the lieutenant's orders had thinned into mutters, gestures, curses whispered only to himself. The command structure had collapsed. Bravo Company was no longer an army. It was a pack of hunted men. Robert Mason dragged his feet through mud that sucked at his boots like quicksand. His rifle dangled at his side, forgotten except as a crutch. Each step carried the weight of ghosts, Ellis screaming. Ramirez torn apart the faces in the mist that might have been comrades or spirits. He had stopped trying to separate the two. In this jungle, everything bled together, living, dead, human, phantom. The jungle's breath pulsed in the air, a rhythm that pressed against his chest. Sometimes it was a whisper, other times a roar. Sometimes Mason swore he felt it through the soles of his boots, as though the very soil beneath him inhaled and exhaled. Each breath reminded him, "You do not belong here." Nguyen Van Tai crouched in the shadows of a banyan tree, his unit arrayed around him. They moved as one with the jungle, each man an extension of root and leaf. Days of ambush had ground the enemy down to bone and nerve. Now came the final strike. Thai looked at the men around him, Hua with his calm eyes, Dung with his scarred cheek, Phuc clutching the rifle of a fallen brother. They were alive, but they carried the weight of countless dead. The jungle gave them strength. The spirits gave them purpose. He whispered to them, "Dame ne rung se ket thuk kuk chin ne." Tonight, the forest will end this battle. They nodded. No fear showed on their faces. They were the forest's soldiers, breathing as one. Night fell, but the darkness never settled into silence. The jungle stirred with movement, frogs croaking, owls hooting, insects whirring in endless drone. Yet layered beneath was the deeper sound, the living breath of the jungle, steady and ominous. Bravo huddled around a flickering light, too terrified to sleep, their eyes darting at every shifting shadow. Mason sat apart, hugging his knees. His mind spun with visions. He saw Ellis again, but Ellis was standing whole in the trees, beckoning. He saw Ramirez whispering prayers with lips stitched shut. He saw his own reflection in the black water of a stream, and behind it the pale faces of Vietnamese soldiers alive and dead watching him with eyes that knew eternity. He muttered to himself, "It's not just the jungle. It's them. They're fighting with more than rifles." The attack came just before dawn. It began with silence. The frogs, the insects, the owls all ceased, as if the world itself held its breath. Bravo felt it, the hush that pressed on their ears, a silence so thick it felt like drowning. Then the earth erupted. Claymore mines hidden by the Vietnamese ignited in thunder. Flames and shrapnel tore through the perimeter, scattering men into screams and smoke. Gunfire cracked from the trees. Muzzle flashes lit the canopy like lightning. Bullets rained from nowhere, striking men before they could aim their rifles. Bravo returned fire blindly, muzzle flashes stabbing at the mist, but hitting only trees, only shadows. Mason dropped to the mud, covering his head as the world shattered around him. He heard Parker shouting, his voice ragged with desperation, "Hold the line! Hold!" The words ended in a wet gasp. When Mason looked up, Parker was on his back, throat split open, eyes wide with disbelief. The line was broken. Thigh moved like smoke through the undergrowth, his rifle barking once, twice each shot deliberate. He felt no hatred, only focus. The Americans were not men to him, now they were invaders, stripped of their power, delivered to the judgment of the jungle. Each bullet he fired was guided by the breath of the forest. Each grenade thrown an echo of the spirit's rage. Hua sprang from the shadows, knife flashing, vanishing again before the enemy could react. Dung's rifle cracked from above, perched in the branches like a phantom. The Americans fired at ghosts, and the ghosts never missed. The jungle itself attacked. Mines detonated beneath feet. Pits swallowed men. Vines snapped under grenades, sending shards of wood into flesh. Every step Bravo took was death waiting. The Americans screamed, but their screams were swallowed by the breath, by the living heartbeat of the earth. Mason crawled, deafened by explosions, his mind teetering on madness. He saw them again, faces in the mist, the burned, the broken, the forgotten. But now they were not only Vietnamese. He saw Ellis, Ramirez, Parker all standing among the phantoms, staring at him with hollow eyes. They had joined the Legion of the Forest. He wept, covering his face. "Please, let me go. I don't belong here." But the jungle answered with a breath so loud it shook the ground. All belong to the earth. The battle ended in less than an hour. Where Bravo Company had stood, only corpses remained. The jungle reclaimed them swiftly, mud-swallowing blood vines covering steel mist, veiling the broken. The few survivors fled, scattering into the endless green, never to regroup. Nguyen Van Tai stood over the clearing, his chest heaving with exhaustion. His comrades emerged from the trees alive but marked by the dead. They had won, but victory was not joy. It was survival sacrifice, the endless cycle of war. Thai whispered, "An em da yin yi, rung da bao vei chung ta." Our brothers rest. The forest has protected us. The jungle answered with a long, steady breath. Robert Mason was one of the few who survived. Days later, staggering out of the jungle, he was half-starved, half-mad. When American medics found him, he babbled about ghosts, about trees that breathed about an army of the living and the dead fighting as one. They thought him delirious. They did not understand. They could never understand. For Mason, the war never ended. He carried the breath of the jungle in his ears for the rest of his life, the rhythm of an earth that refused to yield. At night, he saw faces in the mist, Vietnamese soldiers standing with their fallen brothers, eternal guardians of their homeland. And he knew the truth: America had not been defeated by men alone. It had been defeated by a forest that breathed with the souls of the dead. The jungle still stands, it still breathes, and those who dare to enter still hear its last breath, an eternal warning, an eternal victory.